Hello, this is Russell Moore, and you're listening to The Russell Moore Show, brought to you by Christianity Today. Every week, we explore here conversations and questions from a Christian perspective to help you sort out how to live as a follower of Jesus in confusing times. And this week, we have a conversation to seek to do just that. I'm teaching the Bible at my local congregation every Sunday morning. We just finished a year in the book of Exodus, wrapped it up, taking a break for a little while. And I told the group, I said, when we come back in the fall, we're going to talk about the book of Revelation. And someone said to me, we have the fall, we have the presidential election, we have whatever's happening in foreign policy. Are you feeling especially apocalyptic? And my response was to say, yes, but part of what we're going to be doing as we go through the book of Revelation in the fall is showing you that apocalyptic is not necessarily a bad thing. And that's what I want to talk about today, actually, is the unveiling that happens with apocalypse and with a theme of holding doom and hope very closely together because of a book that is amazing. I really recommend that you check out this book. Many of you know that I love the work of Leif Enger, and now his latest novel, I Cheerfully Refuse. And I'm not going to give you sort of the spoilers through the book because I want you to check it out for yourself. I will say that you will find yourself going in directions you do not see coming ahead of time. And along with that, just amazingly perceptive writing. A lot of the notes that I took were in little asides that just have one sentence that seems to be sort of turning aside and saying something that's amazingly profound and ties in with the larger argument. Leif Enger, thanks so much for being with us today.
Russell, it's a pleasure. And thank you for that really generous introduction. I've been looking forward to this a lot.
I find that sometimes when there's a novel, if you say to somebody, it's a dystopian novel about a future reality not far from now where the wheels have kind of come off, I expect a certain kind of book. And sometimes I like them, sometimes I don't, but I expect a certain kind of book. This was not that book. You managed to, in this book, have this time in the future, and we'll talk about several of these aspects, a really, really deep despair and not very easily gotten out of despair. And yet you have in it this sense of hope, optimism. There's the quote that in many ways sums up the entire book, which is talking about Lark, one of the characters that managed to have a sense of doom with perplexing, happiness?
Probably
or something
doomed
along
and
those lines.
Perplexingly merry. Yeah.
Yes, perplexingly merry. Yeah, the book is that way. How did you pull that off?
I think probably every writer I know is a reader first and writes what they most want to read at the moment. I hadn't really thought about writing a dystopian novel, but the day that we went into lockdown for COVID, everything felt a little wrong, didn't it? Everything felt a little dystopian. And I had been making notes for this story. And then my wife, Robin, said to me a couple of days before lockdown, she said, we're about to lock down for goodness knows how long. Maybe what you should do is take your notes and get going on your book. And so I did that. I thought that was a pretty sound idea because what else were we going to be doing? And I think I wrote what I needed. And what I needed was a community of people that does what a normal community of people often does in hard times, which is they look after each other. They're there for each other in hard times. I don't see that as particularly heroic. I see it as kind of everyday. And these people are in a world that, like you said, we can talk about. Some things have come off the rails. But what they do, and I think they do quite well in the town of Icebridge, where the action begins and where Rainey and Lark live their lives, what they do is they are pretty good at being their brother's keeper. Do you remember? I think you and I might have talked before about the Chronicles of Narnia.
Mm-hmm.
In the Chronicles of Narnia, the characters go through the wardrobe and they find themselves in an alternate world. And it's the first thing they see is like, well, it's winter, it's cold, there's snow on the ground, there's a beautiful forest in the middle of which is a lamppost. And you think, oh, something magical is happening. And then there are talking animals, there are talking beasts. And at first it's a delight. And then quite quickly you realize that what those animals are talking about is all fearsome. There's a lot of fear in the land. Things are messed up in the world of Narnia. And so writing this book, in order to write what I needed to go through a wardrobe door of sorts and write a landscape that I love and that I feel like I'm part of. And then the people that you run into are in some ways kind of up against it. They're in a situation that isn't what anybody would want. And yet they find a way, like the characters in Narnia or like Badger's house, to make a warm world for themselves inside of the wider turmoil.
I've never thought about that until right now, that Mr. Tumnus's house is sort of like Badger's house if it were under surveillance.
Yeah, you're right.
About to be destroyed. Yeah. Well, is your wife is Robin. Yes. Is Lark. The character is, I can't help but see the echo there. Are these figures somewhat similar?
Oh, well, the two are very different. I'm pretty cautious about writing fictional characters that borrow too much from human counterparts. Yeah. You can't really take someone and put them whole cloth into a novel and still have it work, I don't think. I've actually tried that and always had to change it. But there are certainly characteristics of Lark who, I'll just say that Lark is the presiding spirit of this book, more even than Rainey, the narrator. Lark is someone whose faith in people and whose goodness and whose decency. One or two critics have said, well, she's too good to be true. She's not a real character. But those critics have forgotten who is telling the story. And the voice of the narrator is Rainey, her husband. And Rainey's still in love with her. Obviously, he is going to write her in a very generous way. He's going to tell her story the way he sees it. And so that allows me to be as straightforward as I want to be about Lark's terrific characteristics. I loved her. I loved writing her, and I loved writing Rainey's opinion of her.
That was one of the parts of the book that I found most poignant at the moment. Is something really bad happens. I think we can go ahead and say something really bad happens in the book. And the narrator, Rainey, is saying, I'm going to tell you the story, but there's going to come a certain point where I'm going to look away. And that just felt really real to me as somebody who, when we kind of look back on those traumatic things of the past, to say, I can tell the story and I need to tell the story, but there are certain parts I just can't go there yet.
I think that is quite realistic. I mean, the way that we live our lives and narrate our lives to other people, the people that we love, that we talk to regularly, is there are things from which we tend to look away, things we don't dwell on. Sometimes you need to talk things through. Other times you have to have a respectful silence.
You talk about in the book a drug, Willow is what it's called in this near future, that enables people to commit suicide, but they don't want to call it suicide in the book. It's that these are people who want to see what's on the other side, and they're looking for something better or stepping out of the door. When you think about that reality in light of how many deaths of despair that we have happening right now with opioid addiction, other things, What were you exploring with this idea of this longed for suicide? I mean, that's one of the things in the book, is that people really want at least the option to be able to just step out that door.
I wasn't really thinking of any sort of policy or any sort of current situation. I was imagining a world that has become so unwelcoming to people and so unwilling to extend a hand, that some people see no real option but to go in search of better. I really think that despair is a thing that sometimes creeps up and hijacks people's minds. I think that it's very easy to give in. And I don't have any judgment in my heart for people who have taken their lives. I have nothing but sympathy. It's impossible for a person who is alive and whose life is bearable. It's impossible for us to see what somebody else was going through and to know what was in their heart and their mind at the time that they took their lives. So I wanted to write about a world where that has become more common, but where it's also more than ever necessary to say, you can stay in this world and you can make it better. Better is right here. I heard a terrific interview with a guy who wrote a good novel, a climate change novel called The Ministry for the Future. His name is Kim Stanley Robinson. He writes science fiction novels, and he was talking with Ezra Klein at the New York Times. And he was talking specifically about optimism, about hope. And because his novel, which you would think would be maybe a depressing one, climate change is not a particularly optimistic, cheery topic, right? But the book is, in fact, optimistic, and it explores all kinds of hard science that I can't pretend I understand. But it's a very optimistic book. And Ezra Klein said, "How did you do that?" And Kim Stanley Robinson said, I'm gonna butcher the quote, but the essence of it was this: that hope is what keeps the landing strip clear for the muse. That despair does not solve any problems. Despair doesn't solve climate change or any other intractable difficulty that we have in society today. Despair also doesn't write any books. It doesn't really tell any stories.
Yeah.
And so, to me, what Rainey is cheerfully refusing in this book is, at bottom, despair. He's refusing it. He's determined to be hopeful. I took some ideas for this story from the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. And Orpheus, if you remember, is the musician in the classical story whose the love of his life is taken from him by death, and he undertakes the greatest quest, which is to go to the underworld and play his way in with his lyre, and to retrieve his wife from the underworld. I love that story. It's a great story, and I wanted echoes of it in mine. I can't imagine a more hopeful story or a more hopeful person than one who would say, I will go all this way to achieve what is probably impossible.
But of course, the ending
is tragic.
It is impossible.
Yeah, he can't do it.
Yeah.
He comes really close. Orpheus does. He comes very close, but he's in the end unable to achieve what no person can.
I thought about, there's a scene in the book where one person takes the suicide drug, the Willow, sits down and serves pie, and has an hour or so before it takes effect. And he says something along the lines of, I was washing dishes and getting ready, and just the act of washing those dishes almost made me want to change my mind. And I thought of Walker Percy's distinction between a non-suicide and an ex-suicide. The person who sort of no longer has anything at stake, and so is able to have joy in the small and in the ordinary. And it seems to me that was one of the themes that your getting at in this book and in some other places as well is this sense of the little way. Am I reading that wrong?
I think you're reading it entirely right. And I'm unfamiliar with the distinction Walker Percy made that you talked about, but it sounds like
he talks about this man who is going to die by suicide, and then he decides essentially, let's just not and pretend I did. And he realizes he could have done that, and so everything from this point on is kind of lagniappe. It's gravy, and that actually frees him from that sense of stakes that was really keeping him tied down.
I think that's like most of what Walker Percy thought and wrote. That sounds fantastic. I mean, it sounds like he was onto something. Walker Percy was always onto something. Mm-hmm. What he understood was that not to be onto something was to be in despair.
Yeah.
But what I love about that, about the largeness of the small, is that really is kind of the way to avoid the weight of the world landing on your shoulders. None of us are really equipped to handle the weight of the world. I'm certainly not. That's part of the problem with all news all the time, with social media, with the information economy, is that we're not built for it. We're not wired for that. That's not what people are necessarily good at, is handling the weight of the world. But all of us can handle doing the next right thing. All of us can handle, growing some radishes in the garden day by day and watching those sprouts come up. And all of us can handle maybe delivering the occasional loaf of bread to our neighbors who could use it. It's not difficult to do the small thing, and it can sort of save. I think it can save us. I think it can save our outlook and can keep us from despair.
I think there are a lot of people who intuitively, when you say that, would respond with, yes, that's exactly the case. But they don't know how to get out of the cycle of 24-hour news and social media and kind of living this life always on guard for what's about to happen next. They don't know how to find the small again.
Yeah. Well, when the pandemic was going on, in those early days when I was starting this manuscript, the first thing I would do is get up in the morning and work on the story. And that was fun. And that was kind of an escape because, like I said before, I was writing about a world I loved and enjoyed. And I felt like that was a fruitful kind of exploration. But then in the afternoon, Robin and I would always go for a long walk. We live in Duluth, Minnesota. And so it was just starting to be spring here. And the streets were bare because people weren't driving around. They weren't going to work. Mostly they weren't even going much to the grocery store to run errands unless they had to. And what we found was we'd walk for miles, and the streets had all become the most beautiful walking paths. And as the leaves were coming out, they would block the sun, and nothing picked me up quite as much as long walks just in nature, just under the trees. We would walk next to the streams. Duluth is full of streams because it's built on a hill. And many of the streams have beautiful paths beside them that you can walk. And so you walk beside this running water. And sometimes you follow it all the way down to Lake Superior, which is this inland sea that you can't see across. It's like an ocean in your backyard. And just the natural world was the greatest balm and the greatest, I would say, opposition to the weight of the world through the 24-hour news cycle. It was fairly easy not to worry too much about what was happening, not to tune in to the news very often. And I have found that over the years, it's been really helpful to me and just keeping my mind on straight to get outside as much as I can. If I'm just painting the house, or if I'm running errands, or if I am just going for a walk. Duluth is a city. You don't have to be in the countryside to get the benefits of being outside. I think the world takes care of us if we allow it to. Just the natural world, just the sky and the sea and the rivers. That has helped me more than anything else to avoid the despair of the news cycle.
religion comes up several times in this book.
does.
You talk about a priest who's up on a tower, who's kind of an umbrella against a fractious deity, I think is the way you put it. And you talk about the way that people will come up at a funeral, and you don't quote Romans 8:28, but it's that kind of thing where there's a kind of easy optimism that is given, that the narrator sees as kind, but tone deaf. And at one point, you talk about this gathering of people, and you said it was almost like a church, if a church was something that one could bear.
Yeah.
And as I read that, I thought about you and I exchanged some correspondence a couple of years ago, maybe during the pandemic. And I put it in the newsletter with your permission, so I don't feel like I'm saying anything out of school. When you wrote to me about disillusionment and about people who were really disillusioned with religion, and you said something that I found really interesting along the lines of, it's not the disillusioned people that worry me. Right now, I see the skeptics as a sign of hope. It's the people who aren't disillusioned at all. Kind of what was in the background as you're writing this and writing other things about kind of this weird time we find ourselves in as it applies to religion?
Well, I think that doubt is a really important part of the equipment that we're given as human beings. I think doubt is enormously important because I think that all of us have built in a sort of yearning for something larger, for something bigger, for to be part of something sort of noble and everlasting. I think we have that built in. That's the religious impulse, and I think it's one of the best things about humanity. But I think that an impulse that often goes along with it or that follows it is the evangelical one. And that is where, and I use that in the original sense of the word, that you want to spread the word or spread the good news. But what is dangerous about that is that so often, in order to, I don't know, maybe gin up the courage to try to share whatever good news we have, we try to banish all doubt from our minds. But doubt is what enables you to say, maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong about this. I do not have to have all of the answers because as human people, we're not given all the answers. But the moment that I think God whispered in my ear, but not in my neighbor's ear, then I think that we make ourselves available to people who would use us for their own ends. And I think that puts us into a dangerous position. So I appreciate the religious impulse, and I question the evangelical impulse. It's like Voltaire said, or someone, I think it might have been Voltaire. According to the internet, it was Voltaire who said, "Cherish those who seek, flee from those who find." I always prefer seekers to zealots, Russell, because I think that being able to say, I don't have all the answers, I don't know for sure, I think that rescues us from hubris and from atrocities.
But isn't there also a kind of impulse, though, that goes in the other direction of saying there really isn't anything to seek, because who am I to say that someone should be, to go back to Walker Percy, should be on the quest at all? So how do you know if you are in fact a zealot with no place of understanding some of the complexities there, or if you're just a relativist who's not able to at least aspire to something true and good and beautiful?
Well, I mean, I think that the wish for the true, the good, and the beautiful, I think that is built in. I think that's what we were talking about with the religious impulse. And I think we all have that. I mean, I could be wrong about that. Maybe we don't. I think we do. I think that's part of the machinery. But I have enough to try to work it out for myself with fear and trembling that I don't necessarily want other people to try to be like me. Don't don't become a Christian because I'm one. That strikes me as that's territory I can't go. Now, that may be because I've spent most of my life in and around churches where that was the whole thing was we've got to bring our neighbors in, our poor lost neighbors. We have to bring them in. And then you look around at the people who are saying that and their lives are a mess. And you think, well, somebody speak some truth to them. I think it's better to work it out yourself with fear and trembling. And that's something I think when that goes missing, then great swaths of Christianity become available to outright wickedness.
Yeah. I guess I would see it a little bit differently in the sense that I think that one of the most dangerous things that has happened in American religion is not that there's this sense of we've got to bring our neighbors in, hyped up to the next level, as much as it is our neighbors are evil and are irredeemably evil. And so where I have seen the evangelistic impulse in the right way are in congregations where people really do understand my neighbor is loved by God, a human being like I am. That means that if I'm continuing to carry the gospel to my neighbor, that I haven't given up on him or given up on her. And those, when it's done right, those tend to be the people who actually do have empathy for their neighbors and understanding and neighborliness and see the common grace. What worries me is the sort of demonization that says those people on the outside are evil without the understanding. I mean, Augustine was on the outside, and C.S. Lewis was on the outside, and almost every Christian figure who's built up the Church of note was at one point on the outside. Right. That's one of the things I think, honestly, that's been lost.
Yeah, maybe so. What I want to get to in my own life is a place where I can stop saying I'm going to love somebody anyway, implying that they're wrong, I'm right. They should be like me, but I'm going to overcome myself and love them anyway. And that is something I've seen a lot. And I think that's our default position as human beings, is to think that our way is the right way. But the state of Christianity has seemed alarming to me over the past couple of decades, not just since 2016, but for the last couple of decades. It has started to feel more like a political party in some quarters than it has like a system of belief or a faith. And so that's what I had to leave behind. I had to walk away from what felt like a political party and try to align myself with what I believe to be true about the universe.
So where would you say you are now when it comes to spirituality?
Oh, well, I obviously I still have the religious impulse. I'm still looking for what's true and what's good and what's beautiful. But I'm not out to evangelize. I'm not out to persuade. I would rather carry a loaf of bread to my neighbor than the gospel. I'm very careful about the word Christian because it feels like it's a very damaged term right now. I feel bad about that. The Christianity that I was raised with, I still don't have a problem with. But it was a very live and let live kind of system that I remember from when I was a boy. It was my parents, who were devout, were not insistent at that time that everyone else must be devout in a similar way. And I admire that. Looking back, I admire that very much. And I want to emulate that rather than be some sort of a holy war advocate. I can't identify with it.
So your experience is not, when I think of your fellow Minnesotan Garrison Keillor, who sort of grew up in this really as he would describe it, this really kind of oppressive religious system with his parents. That wasn't your background.
It was not. My background was complicated because I grew up in a very mainstream Lutheran church until I was 11 or 12. And then my mother, who was very spiritually restless in the Lutheran church, found a Pentecostal group that met on Saturday nights in a nearby town. And so that sort of became our church over the next few years. And so that was a place where there was a lot of tongue speaking, there was a lot of prophecy and people falling over and being slain in the spirit. And it was also under the grip of a very charismatic leader, which I would look at now in a different way than I did then. I was 11 or 12, and so I was very excited by it. It was it was like, oh, wow, this beats our boring Sunday morning services at the Lutheran Church. But what I did not see was that was leading to a place where of just not accepting anyone else, even people who claimed to be Christians. They were like, well, they're not real Christians. I mean, this group of 40 people right here is Christians, but really nobody else that we can count on. I'm sure you've seen examples of that sort of thing before.
A time or
two. And so I look back now much more fondly and with more generosity toward that early, boring, live and let live congregation that drove my parents nuts. But I see a lot of what was good about it. And it did not set my parents up, the Lutheran Church, didn't set them up for a fall in the same way that the Saturday night meetings did. That's my experience anyway.
In this novel, one of the themes that I think runs through it is this sense of the importance of words.
Yeah.
You have, at one point, you talk about a proudly illiterate president has been elected in this future scenario, and that you have fundamentalist Christians who are trying to shut down libraries. So it was there were some echoes of what we see happening in a lot of school boards, but also Ray Bradbury in there, kind of the beginnings of that kind of thing, of eliminating the written word. And this this very beautiful part where you talk about words being like animals leaving tracks behind. I think there are a lot of people right now who, as one person said to me very recently, said, I don't like that my attention span has been reduced to the level that it is by social media and other things, but it is. And I find that I can't even concentrate on long bits of text at all, much less a novel, person said. So how do we recover that?
That's such a great question. And look, the answer is just a difficult answer. Like anything else, an attention span can be regained with practice. But if we don't have the discipline to practice, to turn off social media for an hour and read a book, this lovely thing happens. And look, this the novel it really plays with this. I think when you read a book and you kind of fall into it, and it's like you lean back and you fall into a river of water, and it sweeps you downstream, and you crawl out 300 pages later, and you're a little different. You're a changed person. Even if you don't know it, your viewpoint has been broadened ever so slightly. You're a different person after a book. And I think that, there are so many stories that have the power to do that, to just sweep you away and to just gently change your thinking in some way that will be productive for you as a person. Maybe the way to get back into it is to look for books that you remember having that experience with and seeing if they still work. Not every book works for you your whole life. That's one thing I've really noticed when I've gone back and revisited certain stories. They don't work as well for me as they used to. Some, on the other hand, speak to me in new ways. I reread David Copperfield last winter, and I hadn't read it in quite a few years. And it was one of those books.
I loved
Isn't that a
that book.
great novel?
It was so, and I need to reread it, but because it was so important to me as a 12-year-old when I was reading it. And I wonder if it would be the same now.
It probably would. Here was my experience. And then maybe we'll chat after you've reread it and we'll see if this works for you as well. But what I found is it was way funnier than I remembered on almost every page. And there is tragedy after tragedy in that story. One bad thing after another is happening to this poor kid, poor Copperfield.
Yeah.
And he's like this homeless kid. He's 9 years old. He's walking across country to get to an uncertain destination. And yet on every page, he makes you laugh. I mean, that was Dickens' incredible gift, was to write characters you adore and that you root for. And I will put Copperfield up against Netflix any night. You can absolutely plunge into that story. It will sweep you downstream for 500 or 600 pages, whatever it is, and you will emerge a happier person. But you have to decide to do it. That's the key.
There are some people who will say to me that they really want to learn how to do that, what we're describing here, sort of being swept away in a book. But they're people who have never had much of a relationship with fiction and poetry, and they don't know where to start. What would you recommend to them?
Well, this is going to show my age and my origins, but absolutely start with The Wind in the Willows and the Narnia Chronicles, because those are stories that have big ramifications and that have big things to say about living in the world and about being the kind of person that others want to be around, and about having a sense of humor through it all. Those books get to all that stuff, but they do it in the form of a tale. In the Narnia Chronicles, a tale that goes on for 7 novels. And I think that if you're going to fall into anything, that might be the way to start. Don't be worried about the fact that you're reading books that were written for children. That doesn't matter. Those books are written for everyone. The last time I read the Chronicles of Narnia, I enjoyed them more than I had when I was 11. And so I think that might be a good way to go. Do you have ideas, Russell, for how to?
Which one would you say for a person to start with?
Either start with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or start with The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, just a great seagoing adventure that takes you to the very edge of the world and back. Or start with The Wind in the Willows. And there's that moment at the beginning of The Wind in the Willows. Oh my goodness. It's happening to me again now as I think about it. But it begins with Mole, and he's underground, and he's just awakened because he's a hibernating animal, and he's just awakened. And he's cleaning his kitchen. He's doing his spring cleaning, and something is calling to him. It's calling to him from outside. And he's like, what is that? What's calling to me? What's calling is spring. And what's calling is the wind and the smell of the waving grasses in the meadow above his head. And so the moment that he pokes his head out and looks around and sees the grasses in the sky above, at that point, you're just gone. Or at least every time I read it, at that point, I'm gone. I'm with him. He's running across the meadow. He's going to the river where he's going to meet the water rat, one of the greatest of all literary characters. And the rat is going to pack this magnificent picnic, and they're going to go down the river in this boat. And from the moment that he's in that world, that to me, it's like a little metaphor for being swept up by a book. He makes the effort to poke his head above the ground. With a book like that, that's all you have to do. And then you're gone, and you're downriver with Rat, and there's danger, and there's the wild wood at night, and there's the blizzard, and there's the wonderful badger and his underground home that saves the day when they need it most. And then there's even a sort of return of Odysseus moment at the end. I mean, if that's not the perfect book, I don't know what is. Start with books that are written for people younger than you are, and maybe you'll soon fall in.
I don't think of myself as a demonizing zealot, but if you had said start with The Magician's Nephew, I would have become one. How do you write?
How do I write?
Do you set aside Yeah. Do you set aside every day? Do you wait for inspiration?
Oh no, I never wait for
Um,
inspiration. I work
yeah.
I work like a boring office job hours. I get up in the morning. Well, that's not strictly true. I usually start around 6 or 6:30 in the morning, but I wake up early. And I start with the morning pages. There's a book called The
Oh,
Artist's
yeah.
Way that maybe we've talked about before, but Julia Cameron wrote this book 30 years ago or so that talks about the value of getting up in the morning and just spilling some words onto pages. She suggests, 3 notebook pages in half an hour. So you're just getting up and you're writing fast. And I found that really useful for clearing out the cobwebs and for sorting out some things that I hope to do during the day's writing. Or maybe just, sometimes it's just weather forecasts. If I want to go kite flying that day, I'll just write about what I hope the weather's going to be. And sometimes even that can carry me on for 2 or 3 pages. It's just a matter of loosening up your writing muscles a little bit. And so then I'll have breakfast. Robin is usually up by then, and we have breakfast. And then I go up to my office and I'll write pages until noon, have some lunch. Afterward, go back up, work until 5 or 6 in the evening. I work a fairly long day, and I rewrite the previous day's work every day. And so by the time I have a draft, it's been gone through quite a few times.
I was really glad at some point in this book where Rainey, I think, is the one who is saying this, who is talking about not understanding everything that he's reading. He says, not by half do I understand it, but when it thunders, your chest is shaking. Yeah. Because I find that's an impediment to people, whether they're reading the Bible or whether they're reading fiction or poetry, and they say, I don't understand what I'm reading. And what I usually say is keep going, because that's the way stories work. When Jesus gives parables, he says, so that those who can see, and those who are blind remain blind. There has to be a certain preparation that happens, and just let the story do its work on you there. And I really do. I think that is just a tremendous obstacle to people to think, unless I'm able to right now sort of take this story and give it back to you in an abstraction. Right. Then it's not worth looking
and
at.
that's such a mistake, because words have enormous power to sort of soak in to your mind like rain into the earth. And it takes a long time sometimes for rain to get down to where the seeds are and do their work. But if you just read it, if you just read right through your non-understanding, sometimes a person can go back and read it a second time and they get a little bit more. Some people don't have the patience for that. I think often that doesn't even matter. You will absorb something if you just persevere. If it's a difficult paragraph, read through it and then get to something that is easier to understand before you put the book down. Hemingway did that when he was writing. He always found it easier to pick up in the morning if he had left off at a place where it was going well. And the same holds true, at least for me, for reading. If I'm reading something difficult, right now I'm reading this book, Zero at the Bone, by Christian Wyman.
Chris Wyman.
It's fantastic. It's quite brilliant, but it's very hard going. At least for me, it's a difficult read. It makes me think really hard, and I don't understand all of what I'm reading at the time, but I can feel it in there sort of doing its work. And so I'm going to keep at it, and I'll probably go back and read it again a year or two down the road and see if it makes even more sense to me than it does now.
I'd like to end with a beautiful closing paragraph from I Cheerfully Refuse, in which Rainey, the character, is coming back on a boat. He hears the music there of the people who are gathered around having a kind of festival. There's a comet that's been in the sky. And this is what it says. That's what reached me first, miles out from the harbor, a song. I didn't know its melody, like liquid and its architecture strong. The wind faded and flower, the boat, ghosted forward into nightfall. Lights appeared, street lamps, pit fires, dim solar lanterns under which the band now shifted to a higher gear. Above and to the right, the comet. I am always the last to see the beauty I inhabit. The street was hazy and magnified, close to the sky. People moved on the sidewalks, swayed in the street. Ancient or ageless, that's how it looked, but also vital and recent. A new release, a first-hand world. I steered for home. Maybe I would dance. Beautiful and moving. Leif Enger, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for letting me come on the show today.
The book is called I Cheerfully Refuse. I really recommend it highly to you. You know, I was talking to somebody this week about the Father Justin AI that, for those of you who listen to the Bulletin on Fridays, we talked about a while back. And this person said, you know, I'm really distressed about the idea of having a Jesus AI that people talk to and think that they're talking to Jesus. And I said, yeah, it's almost kind of Revelation 13-ish with making the image of the beast speak as though the voice is the voice of God. But, you know, the more I think about that's not a future dystopian sort of scenario. It's the one that we've always had. The question of how to see the real. I disagree with Leif Enger, obviously, about evangelism. I think that the problem with the Christian church right now is not that we're brimming with telling our neighbors good news. It's that we've forgotten how to do that, and we don't really believe that it's necessary. We don't really see ourselves as once having been lost and now being found. We instead are dividing ourselves up into irredeemable darkness and invincible light. We're children of light. We're not the light. We bear witness to the light. But I can see the disillusionment that's there, and I can also see in this beautiful book someone who is picturing a different way of people who have a kind of apocalypse that reveals not just the dead and the doomed, but also what's beautiful and small and ordinary and life-giving underneath all of that. And that is apocalyptic in its own way. You think of what Jesus says to John on the island of Patmos at the beginning of Revelation. Fear not, I am the first and the last and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forever, and I have the key of death and Hades. Write therefore the things that you have seen, those that are and those that are about to take place after this. Keep reading. Some of those things are pretty scary, but it ends well. And so we're, in the end, I suppose, as Leif Enger's book puts it, probably doomed and perplexingly merry because we realize we're not doomed after all. It's even worse than it appears, and so much better. I cheerfully refuse despair. And we'll see you next week on The Russell Moore Show.
If you enjoy The Russell Moore Show, take a second to share this episode with a friend or leave a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. The Russell Moore Show is a production of Christianity Today. Executive producers are Eric Petrick, Russell Moore, and Mike Cosper. Host is Russell Moore. Produced by Ashley Hales. Associate producers are Abby Perry and Mackenzie Hill. Director of Operations for CT Media is Matt Stevens. Audio engineering provided by Dan Phelps. Video producer is Abby Egan. And the theme song for The Russell Moore Show is Dusty Delta Day by Lennon Hutton.